Welcome back to Outlook from the Inside. I'm Mike Greenwald, head of Friedman's Business Tax Practice. And with us today is Christian Burgos. Christian's a managing principal with the firm and the co-leader of our state and local tax practice. Thanks, Christian, for being with us today.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure being here.
One thing to note about Christian is he is quite a proficient amateur mixologist, and his long-term goal, once he's done teaching us about state and local taxes and helping our clients, is eventually to open his own bar. And we are all looking forward to partaking in some of his more exotic mixed drinks. So thanks, Christian. We're looking forward to that.
The first round will be on me, Mike.
That best offer I've had this morning. Anyhow, today we're going to be talking about the state and local tax implications of telecommuting, what's been going on through the whole past 9-10 months with this pandemic, and some little thoughts, takeaways that might be useful in terms of dealing with employees who are working from home or are changing where they live. So given the ongoing shelter-in-place orders that are prevalent throughout the United States, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with the businesses that you deal with that are able to keep their operations active by having their employees work from home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without a doubt, the spread of COVID-19 has had a major impact on how businesses are operating, and how employees are finding ways to fulfill their responsibilities in a remote environment. Primarily due to safety concerns, many employers are requiring that employees work from home rather than commute to the office, where employees would typically provide their services. And while at first glance, this may seem like a practical solution, we've seen in many instances employees actually relocating outside of the employer state to other states, where employees are looking to be closer to family or for any other multitude of reasons.
So what are some of the challenges now? Businesses have this remote telecommuting. They have employees all over the country, as you say. So what are the challenges from a state and local tax perspective?
The first question I always get in situations like these is, what do I have to do from a payroll perspective? This is the most obvious question, given that now an employee may be working entirely in a different state with different state income tax withholding rules and other regulatory requirements. And this is not as easy as it seems. So generally, I mean, withholding is required in the state in which an employee's services are performed, not necessarily where they reside. However, as with everything in life, I mean, there are exceptions. And so you have some states like Florida, Nevada, and Texas, just to name a few, that don't impose a personal income tax. And so the payroll tax withholding schemes in these states are going to be slightly different than, say, a state like California and New York, where you have probably more of a withholding requirement versus just reporting maybe unemployment insurance or workers' compensation, or maybe any other type of contributions that the state may impose other than an income tax withholding on these individuals. Other states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania may have reciprocal agreements, which provide that the residents in one state do not have to file or pay income tax returns on wages earned in the non-resident state. So there are many different variations to, just from a payroll perspective, that are creating some challenges for a lot of the businesses that are now starting to have employees relocate out of their own market. And you can see just from a payroll tax perspective how things can get fairly complicated quite quickly. Aside from the payroll tax perspective and some of the challenges that we've just discussed there are a lot of companies that are getting whipsawed in other areas of state taxation, like business income taxes, sales taxes, even in local jurisdictions. There are certain cities like San Francisco, for example, that impose a tax based on your payroll expense for any employees that are actually performing services in your city. So there are many different areas of state taxation beyond the payroll that could potentially be implicated.
So, Christian, you're talking about the exposure that employers get because they might have an employee working in a new state or a new city where they were never doing business before. And I could see an employer making the argument that, well, the employee is physically sitting in a room in another state or another city. but they're working using my technology, and my technology is still where my main office is. So how does the state know where the employee is actually working? And how do I know what jurisdiction I'm supposed to withhold payroll taxes for?
That's a good question, Mike. From a compliance perspective, when you're talking about an employer's responsibility for reporting some of these changes, I mean, they have they have a legal obligation to update any records that they may have on their employees. So, for instance, if you have an employee that's looking to relocate from New York to, say, Indiana or any other state, your HR department has the obligation to update that employee's records for not only their own internal purposes, but as well as, I mean, you have to report this to the IRS when you're doing your federal withholding, and so you also have to do it from a state withholding perspective as well. Although maybe from an enforcement perspective, it may be difficult for a state taxing authority to be monitoring and tracking all of these movements. A state is bound to eventually find you. I mean, they always, I mean, there's so much information sharing between the taxing authorities, both at the federal, state, and the local levels, that, I mean, you can't hide for, I mean, you can't hide for such a long time. So it's better to it's always better to maintain compliance on a prospective and an ongoing basis. Like the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so you don't want to be stuck in a position where you have to now remediate any misreporting or any errors in reporting as a result of some of these changes.
Where is, I guess the question is a definitional one. Where is the work actually being performed? Is the work being performed where I'm physically, doing the labor, or is the work being performed where my computer interacts with the company's main source of software and computing power?
I mean, I think we could go down a path and have a philosophical debate as far as where the work is being performed. But from a legal perspective, I mean, there's ample case law that essentially provides that where the employee is actually rendering the services is typically where the work is being performed. And that's been the proxy that has been used historically from an income and a sales tax perspective, if you're looking at it from just the purely state tax, a pure state tax perspective.
So it's interesting to see just how many issues can arise just from having one employee relocate. But given that a lot of these moves are prompted by the pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders, aren't the state taxing authorities at least sympathetic to the business community and the challenges that everyone's facing? And hopefully they're a little bit on our side.
There have been a number of states that have issued administrative guidance affording businesses some measure of relief from some of the tax obligations that we were just discussing because of the situation being faced with the COVID-19 and employees being forced to work from home or in another state where the employer would otherwise not have that physical presence or that nexus. However, you have to keep in mind that some of these relief provisions are temporary and limited to circumstances that are likely directly related to the response to the current pandemic. And also, you have to bear in mind that not every state has taken the same view, and you may have a situation that, regardless of the reason why you now have an employee in the state, that state may still assert its jurisdiction over the business and compel the business to actually file the requisite tax returns.
So what should companies do when they're presented with a situation where an employee is looking to relocate or forced to relocate because of the pandemic? Are these isolated circumstances, or there's got to be some guidance, some advice that you have to share based on what you've learned over the last 9 months or so?
Absolutely. Firstly, you have to have an understanding of the reasons for the employee's desire to move, and for having that remote based employee. From that, you should also have a complete understanding of all of the potential tax and non-tax implications by having a remote employee as well.
Any final words for our viewers?
Of course, I mean, these are situations that have a lot of complexity to them. again, it's not just as simple as having your employees just pick up and go and work at a new location. Pick up the phone, reach out to your resources, reach out to us. This is not a situation where you have to go it alone. There may also be some planning opportunities that may not have been present before, by now exploring your activities in these other states where you may now be, where you may now have a physical presence.
Well, thanks, Christian. And I'm looking forward to that first round of drinks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.